Hey there. I thought it might be helpful to show you how I do practice with parents, which is the lesson that I send home with parents each week to let the parents and First Christian Kids, FCC kids, know what we did in class and also so that they can practice at home. And what I found is when asking parents, some of them do the practice with parents with their children and others don't. Some of them with very young children say, well, I would, but it's a little too advanced. And so I thought I would show you an example of what to do with this week's practice with parents. This week's story was about how Jesus walked on the water. Just to give you a little bit of background, this is in the Bible. I'm looking in Matthew 14, and it's just after Jesus feeds the 5,000 people with the little bit of food that he had. So it talks about in the story how Jesus was ready to be by himself. So for those of you that are introverts, I know that you get that. So Jesus went away by himself, and he sent his disciples away on a boat, and he goes off to pray on a mountain all by himself. And then late at night, he shows up. Not just shows up, but walks on the water, shows up. And so his disciples see him and they think it's a ghost, which they would have believed in ghosts. They don't believe that it's Jesus, but then Jesus tells them who it is. And then someone says, Peter says, that he would believe it if Jesus would call him to himself. And so guess what Jesus does? He calls Peter. Peter comes, starts to walk on the water as Jesus did, which we know is a miracle. It can't really happen for us. Jesus could do it because he was God and he can do miracles. And what happened was Peter started to pay attention to around him and got scared and looked around, took his eyes off Jesus and began to fall. Jesus pulled him up and saved him. What happens is when they get back on the boat, Jesus and Peter and all the guys are there, and then they realize that Jesus is God. This isn't just some great prophet, which people today would even say, different faiths would even say, oh, Jesus was a great prophet or he was a great teacher. They said, no, Jesus is God. He's able to produce miracles. He's able to feed thousands of people. He's able to do this, and they began to worship him. So that's the background story for you. I read it and I abbreviated it, summarized it for you from Matthew 14 verses 22 through about 33. And so what would I do with children? Well, in the practice with parents, which is what I send home each week, I know it's backwards to you, but just so you see, when I write the lessons, I send this home and I do a little abbreviated part for parents of what we learned, and then I tell them try this thing. Now for older kids, what I talked about this week was that when things become difficult at home or at school and a storm develops, that you could talk about this story with Jesus, about Jesus and what he did and how Jesus is always with us, even when we feel scared. The disciples didn't know where Jesus was. They were away from him. He was on a mountain praying. They were by themselves. This storm develops, and look who shows up in the midst and shows that he's able to be who he is. He's able to walk on water and defy gravity and defy physics and all of those things. Jesus did that. And so in what I told them in the practice of the parents, told you, was to talk to your children about that, about when the storm is here and it's busy and crazy and whatever, to ask Jesus to guide you. And then also the lesson that we talk about, you've probably heard if you grew up in church, is to keep your eyes on Jesus, not look at what all is going on around you, like the storm, like Peter did. Because when that happens, we become so focused on the outside that we forget to focus on what matters and who can save us, which is Jesus. Sometimes this can apply greater to adults, but it also can work with kids when they're stressed out because of homework, when they're nervous because they've got an assignment coming up, when they're having issues with friends or peer pressure. These are great things to talk about with elementary children, middle school children, high school, college, adult, and beyond. For little kids, though, what do you do? Because they don't get that abstract thing. They do understand, though, lots of things about water, and this might be a great lesson to have during bath time, because they're in the bathtub anyway, often playing with toys. And so you can do the sink or float thing. Try something. Does this little guy sink or does he float? Does this little ball sink or does it float? Things like that. And then talk about their prior experiences. Surely they've been in water, maybe in a pool or at the ocean or somewhere like that. And can they walk on water? Well, no, they can't. They get that. And then you proceed to tell the story of Jesus. I always like to tell children, little preschoolers and bigger kids, it's not a fairy tale. This is a story from the Bible. And it's not a magical book, but it's a book of true things about Jesus and about how God the Father loves us and about all the things that we know as Christians. So I let them know it comes from a very special book, which is very different than any fairy tale or movie they've seen or heard. For little kids, there are lots of options for Bibles. for older children too. I like to use this one, which is my favorite Bible storybook for early readers. There are other options. In the story Bibles, of course, they have pictures of the story. So especially when you're doing stories about Jesus, or other stories that have pictures, you can show them the pictures and talk through the story. It's always okay to put it in their terms and not use exactly the words in here. Remember, these are already summarized for us. They're not exactly what the Greek says for little guys and girls. So that's a good thing to do. Again, if you're back to the bathtub story, you might have a boat in the bathtub that you could talk about. Jesus' friends, his disciples were on the boat, and what happened about Jesus walking. Use your fingers or have them stomp their feet. Jesus walked on the water, different things like that. Anything that you can do with little guys and girls that is concrete is really good for them, because they learn concrete first and then take it to abstract. Another thing to remember about little guys and girls, and as we get older, is that repetition is good. I wrote a blog about this a while back, but we all learn by repetition. I did CrossFit recently, and I didn't learn how to do some of those moves just one time. I had to do it and repeat it and repeat it. And then even after I learned it, we would still review the process before we even got into adding weights. That's how we learn. So to bring this up again, when there's a storm outside, bring up the time about Jesus walking on water. When it's windy outside, you can even talk about the wind and when there was a windstorm and Jesus was walking on water. You can talk about it when it's time to pray. What did Jesus do when he was tired and needed to be away from people? He prayed on a mountain. There are lots of ways to incorporate this. Anytime you use water, washing dishes, in the pool, all those different things. But remember to take these moments that you do in everyday life and use them as teachable moments. It's not just about what we learn at church. We do our very best to teach your children about these stories, but you know what? It's so much about what you do at home. So take some time each day or take some time each week to spend with your kids. Use what your church sends home with you. And if you want more information from me about that, I'd be glad to help you. You can always check out my blog, and I'll try to do more videos like this too, maybe even with live children next time. Hope you have a wonderful day and keep teaching kids about God.